Hi, I'm Ted Nelson, about to reminisce about this old house, the big house at the family farm, Galeridge. So Galeridge began in 1921 when my great-grandfather, Edmund Gale Jewett, bought property to the north. He, the handwritten mortgage for $400 is on the internet. He wanted to grow berries. He was a science teacher in Brooklyn, but wanted to grow berries and moved out to these far reaches of New Jersey. I'll never know why, but these are the so-called skylands or highlands of New Jersey. Lovely hills, beautiful views. And he and his wife, Mrs. Jewett, came here on the property, but then her daughter and her husband, Theodore Holm and Mrs. Holm, together, all four of them came here during the summers of the 1920s. So let's see, my mother was born in 1917, and so she spent summers here at the old camp. It was called the so-called camp at the northern end, or what was then the camp. And then in 1943, as my great-grandparents needed more warmth and certainty, my grandfather, Theodore Holm, bought this house, which from very wonderful people, the Lavals, and it was a very snug, well-built house at that time. So I'm going to tell you some memories of this house that I had. I was 6 years old when we bought it. We moved in when I was 7. The Lavals stayed a little longer after we bought it. So it was a well-built house, dated 1906, although there are rocks that have clearly been in the basement much longer, but let's say it was built in 1906 in a solid so-called salt box form. It had a front porch and a living room, a dining room, and a kitchen, and then 2 rooms upstairs. So this was a very solid house until it was terribly rebuilt after my grandparents died. Both my great-grandparents were already gone, and my grandparents died in the 70s, and this was horribly rebuilt in the 1980s. I won't say by whom. And the old footprint, they somehow extended the old footprint. So let me reminisce about the way this house used to be, especially this room, and then I'll talk about some of the other rooms. So this was the kitchen, and so the boundaries of it were about here, and the end of it was about here, and the well where we actually pumped water was about there. It's been sealed up now. And we went out with buckets, and I would pump. My great-grandfather would pump. My grandfather would pump, and we'd come back in with buckets of water and put them on the old cast iron wood stove, which was right here, and put wood in. So this was the 1940s, because I was here in the because we moved into this place, as I said, in 44. So we had the cast iron stove. Eventually, my grandfather replaced it with an electric stove. But here was the dinner table, where my great-grandfather would recite poetry, and my grandparents would talk about literature and philosophy and history. It was mostly for my benefit, but it was a wonderful environment, full of love. And sometimes my mother would visit us for Christmas. I remember the Christmas of 1949. She came here and gave us a Polaroid camera. And however, that Christmas of 1949 has a terrible memory, because my grandfather, Theodore Holm, I was named after the man who was going to raise me. My grandfather, Theodore Holm, loved potatoes. He was from Norway, and his favorite dish was boiled potatoes with butter. And when the pressure cookers came along in the late 1940s, why, that meant you didn't have to cook the potatoes for an hour. You could cook them only 15 minutes. So we had a pressure cooker, cast aluminum, with a heavy top. Was it steel? It might have been steel. I think it was cast steel. And it had 2 black rotary handles which secured the top. And in the center, it had a little lever which controlled a valve. There was a little button under the valve. and you moved a weight on the lever to determine the amount of pressure you wanted. So when that amount of pressure was reached, the valve would lift and it would start to whistle, so you would know your potatoes were done or whatever. So on that terrible night, my grandfather, the potatoes whistled, and my grandfather forgot to release the pressure on the valve. He turned the two handles. In the resulting explosion, the top of the pressure cooker hit the ceiling, made a dent in the ceiling roughly there. My grandfather's life was saved by the fact that he wasn't directly over it. His head would have been smashed. His eyesight was saved. As his face was covered with boiling mashed potatoes, his eyesight was saved by his glasses. So my great-grandfather and I drove him to the Morristown Hospital. I was 12, but all the way I was in such a rage at the stupid mentality of the people who had designed this thing without thinking of the human factors. Of course, I didn't know the term human factors, but it was perfectly obvious that someone might forget to let off the valve. In fact, my great-grandfather then repaired the pressure cooker with a steel band across the top. So you could not possibly, which held down the valve, you could not possibly, and halves of two halves of a rubber ball covering the two handles. So you could not possibly turn the handles without releasing the valve. This was minimalist design. And the idiots who designed it, you see, this began my fight with the tekkies long ago in 1949, because somebody imagined the function but not the mind of the user. All right, other happy memories of the house. This was a house full of love, as I said. My mother sometimes came to visit, and my father and her other ex-husband, my mother's other ex-husbands, and many other people, and the porch was eventually filled in. I'll describe the rest of the rooms, because when I was 7, I had an upstairs room and little pictures of Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs with fuzzy flocking. And then when I was 13, I got an upstairs room. My great-grandfather got this room over here after my grandmother died. My great-grandfather died. My great-grandmother had broken her back, so she and my great-grandfather, the Jewetts, lived in an upstairs room, and he cared for her when he wasn't out tending his orchards. And she listened to the radio all the time. So those were the days of radio when the whole family listened to the radio together because there was no television. And on weekends, Sunday nights, we would all listen to the Bell Telephone Hour, classical music. Saturday nights, I guess we would listen to Fred Allen and Jack Benny. But there was something funny about the way the radio worked, because we found that if you put your hand behind the radio, it improved the reception. You, even without attachment, you somehow formed a part of the antenna loop. And so my grandfather and I would take turns sitting with our hands on the back of the radio. And my great-grandmother in those days, Mrs. Blanche Eugenie Newell, when I was little, but still in this house, so from the age of 7 to perhaps 10, she read to me from the Albert Payson Terhune books of Dogs and Ponies, I think, and the Oz books. And then we bought her a canary. And the canary was called Marigold, Merry-Gold, because the Celeste Holm Marigold, named after my mother, publicity from 20th Century Fox in the late 1940s, the Celeste Holm Marigold had been out front, so we called the little bird Marigold. So did I describe the Thanksgiving and Christmas dinners? They were in the room behind. There's a dining room, and We would come here for Thanksgiving and Christmas, and Mrs. Meyer, the farmer's wife up the lane, would make a whole turkey with all the trimmings, and we would have it for Christmas, and then again for Thanksgiving, and then again for Christmas. And then we would go to the living room and play the ring game. And this was a wonderful game in which children could play equally. So a loop of string was put between the fists of everyone in the ring, and one person's ring, my grandmother's and my grandfather's, was put on the string. And then it was hidden, so the person in the middle had to try to guess who was holding the ring, and the ring was passed back and forth between the fists. And so it was a game that children could play on an equal footing with adults, which is excellent. And we would sing songs and carols with my great-grandfather or my grandmother playing the piano. Also in the living room, I had terrible whooping cough my 14th year. So those are some memories of Galeridge 2, after the upper farm was extended down here to the big house. Thank you.